Well, good afternoon and welcome. Thank you for coming to our first ever virtual film event. I am Sherry Barato. I am the Sexual Assault Response Team Manager at LACASA. And for those of you who may not be as familiar with LACASA, LACASA is the nonprofit agency in Livingston County that provides services for victims and survivors of domestic violence, sexual assault, and child abuse. So our film event today was made possible by a grant from the Office for Victims of Crime, and it was to raise awareness during Crime Victims' Rights Week. And we had intentionally planned to have this event in person in April, but unfortunately, due to the pandemic, we had to postpone, and we decided for the safety of everyone, we would just go ahead and do things different and have a virtual event. So welcome to the best Zoom meeting you've attended so far. So while our focus is primarily on sexual assault and the Me Too movement, we are here to recognize all victims of crime, and we especially want to remember and to honor those who were killed by violent perpetrators. So I would first like to take a moment just to briefly introduce and thank all of our participants in today's event. So with us today, we have our esteemed guest speaker, Nicole Denson from Equality, Michigan. Our panelists, Bill Valancourt, the Chief Prosecutor, and Pam Moss, the Chief Assistant Prosecutor, both from the Livingston County Prosecutor's Office. Officer Christy Bell from the Brighton Police Department. April Woods, Assistant Principal at Pinckney High School. Matt Oliver, the Associate Dean of Students at Cleary University. DeAndre Lipscomb from Lake Trust Credit Union. And Nicole Mason from ChemTrend. From LACASA, we have with us Nicole Matthews-Creech, who is our Director of Social Change Advocacy. Cassie Glover, our Youth Prevention Educator. And last but not least, we have Babette Schrant, who is our President and CEO. And Babette would like to share a few words with you.
Yes, hello and welcome. And thank you all again for attending this very critical and important conversation that we're going to have today. And I first just wanted to be able to say, in order to end sexual assault, we must change the attitudes, the beliefs, and the actions that perpetrate and justify this violence. Sexual assault is largely supported and condoned by social attitudes and beliefs. These attitudes and beliefs are conveyed by our laws, by how our systems respond to sexual assault, by our cultural portrayal of women, the women's unequal status in our society, by the media's coverage of sexual assault, and in interpersonal relationships. Educating our citizens through informational campaigns and presentations, such as what we're here today doing, and through the media's coverage of sexual assault, it is a first step in realizing a future free of sexual assault and violence. And today's event is such a step that we are taking in educating. And I want to thank you all for taking this time to being here and to being present. And sexual assault is really a pervasive issue in our world, and in our community is no exception. During 2016, I just wanted to share just a quick little stat, is that there were 142 reported violent crimes in Livingston County. 34% of those crimes were reported as rape, 50 cases. And in the state of Michigan, the rate of rape cases is 11.2%. So the proportion of violent crimes being rape compared to other violent crimes in Livingston County is 3 times higher than the state rate. So it is a problem, and it is happening, and it is occurring here in Livingston County. And I just wanted to share that LACASA does believe that sexual violence is a terrifying, ferocious, and demeaning crime. Its effect on the victims and the victims' loved ones can be psychological, emotional, and physical. And it is important to remember that there is no one normal reaction to sexual assault. Sexual assault continues to plague our nation and destroy lives. All members of our society are vulnerable to this crime, regardless of race, age, sexual orientation, gender, ability, or social standing. When sexual assault does occur, victims deserve competent and compassionate care. And we know that effective collection of evidence is a of paramount importance to successfully prosecuting sex offenders. Just as critical, though, in performing sexual assault forensic interviews, it is important for us to be sensitive, provide dignified and victim-centered services to those who have suffered. For individuals who experience this horrendous crime, having a positive experience with criminal justice, healthcare systems can contribute greatly to the overall healing. And I think today's panel and those people participating shows that our community comes together to provide for victims. And LACASA has been providing these sexual assault services since 2004 in the same program here in Livingston County. We now have grown to be a sexual assault comprehensive services where we provide counseling, support services, 24-hour on-call services. We have a shelter. People don't always realize that victims of sexual assault can enter into our shelter. We now, for the first time, are able to provide those same services and pediatric SANE exams here in our own county, where children don't have to now leave our county to have those services. We also have our SART, which Sherry, who is our host here, our hostess, is that we as a community have come together with a community response to these issues. And we have developed the sexual assault response team here in Livingston County. So LACASA is very, very proud to be a part of this and privileged to be part of this movement and to be a part of this community and to have such wonderful panelists to be a part. Thank you from the bottom of our hearts to having this difficult conversation and bringing it forward. So we appreciate you being here, and on behalf of all of LACASA staff and board of directors, thank you.
Thank you, Babette. So next up, we have our featured guest speaker. Nicole Denson is the director of the Department of Victim Services at Equality, Michigan. She is a mother, activist, contributing author, and warrior who has more than 15 years of experience providing advocacy services to marginalized communities with a focus on crisis intervention, counseling, and advocacy for survivors of human trafficking and other violent crimes. Nicole defines herself as an unapologetically Black queer woman. She believes that all survivors of trauma deserve equal rights, respect, dignity, and safety. She prides herself on being an LGBT advocate, centering her ally work in particular surrounding the mass killing and discrimination against transgender women of color. Thank you for being here, Nicole. We can't wait to hear from you, so go ahead. You're muted, Nicole.
Thank you so much, you all. I knew that was going to happen to me. I just knew it. I can't express how honored I am to be here with you all today and to be with LACASA. I've heard wonderful things, and I just want to be remiss if I didn't acknowledge Nicole for reaching out to me and extending the olive branch. I knew immediately when Nicole and I connected right during the pandemic that I wanted to be ongoing working with you all. The way that she was honest and transparent and just acknowledging what was going on in the world and making sure that I was okay and that I was centered. And we just shared a lot of dialogue, and I wanted to acknowledge that and lift her up because a lot of times we are doing this work or in the community right now, it's a lot of uncertainty. But when we interact with each other and we actually take the time to get to know one another for all of the love and all of the pain, everything that's happening, to actually step out of our roles and connect on a human level is why I'm here today. So just know that I appreciate you all and the hard work. I've heard about your organization, and I'm here to share a few words. So I just wanted to say that before I started. Okay. And so, you know, I have been doing this work for a long time, but, you know, good afternoon. Welcome to this quintessential discussion on the importance of continuing to dismantle the silence that permeates all of our daily lives. Again, I work for Equality Michigan. We are a statewide LGBT organization. We are a 501c3, and we also are 501c4 organization. Of course, I'm over the 501c3, which is the Victim Services. And I will tell you that since the COVID and the racial pandemic and epidemic, it has been really busy for us, but we are focused. We have multiple sites. We have a site in Holland, we have a site in Grand Rapids, and we have a site transgender in Bay City for Traverse City. And so what we do is we make sure across the state, because many survivors who are LGBT face different issues depending on the city they're in. So we go to these different cities, we survey the individuals, we ask what the community needs, and we provide free counseling, free crisis intervention, and advocacy. And we've been doing that for a very long time. So I'm so honored to be a part of this team. I joined in February, and I would say that this was a really great opportunity for me. So I want to acknowledge that we were just getting over and still going through a global health pandemic, yet we had the open wounds of a racial epidemic that have came in all of our lives. I want to acknowledge that I want to create this and this event and have a safe, brave space, mutual respect, and have an open heart. I ask that now that we take a moment to center the lives of the individuals that we lost due to police brutality, such as George Floyd, Breonna Taylor, Ahmaud Arbery, and the many people, the list is too long to name. The reason why I wanted to bring that up in this is because with my intersectionality, and intersectionality was first coined in 1989 by Kimberly Crenshaw, who is a Black scholar and a feminist professor with UCLA currently. I wanted to bring up intersectionality because throughout my career, throughout my teenage years, no matter if I was living in Detroit, Lansing, or anywhere in Michigan, I felt myself as a LGBT Black woman having to feel split. And for anybody there who's wearing multiple hats, which intersectionality is about, just know you don't have to split. You can be your whole entire self. And it's something that'll change your entire life, depending on your career, depending on who you have in your life, relationships, but know that it's an ongoing change. And that when you find the right type of space, whether it's family, friends, or workplace like I have, people will be able to accept you who you are. And so the wonderful thing about this right now is that sexual assault, domestic violence, crime victims, they look like all of us. And so the wonderful thing is no longer to say who's going to save ourselves. We can save ourselves. And Jackson Katz, who you're about to see, is a phenomenal person in our movement. I have played his information and his documentaries through training. And so while we're protesting and we're organizing, we have to also look at our daily lives. And being bystanders and having bystander intervention training and discussions are key to taking that next level and that next step towards planning and actually having action. And to be quite honest, because of the planning, the intention that Nicole and her team has done, that is why I'm on this call. Because of the many different hats I wear, just like many people right now, you're really scared. You're scared because you're dealing with, we don't know who has corona, who does not. We do not know who is, quote unquote, going to harm us or who is not. We see the police brutality, but we see brutality on TV all the time. So it's important for us to realize what can we control now. And that is why it's important to have this for us. Myself as a sexual assault survivor, I have learned the tools and the healing that I needed so that I could center myself and ground myself. So if you don't get anything from this discussion of what I'm saying, is to please, if you need to unplug, do so. The last 2 days, I turned off social media as much as I could. I turned off the phone, and I really understood and tried to get back in tune with myself out of all of the noise. And so I really want to honor you all for having me here. And I really want to say that this is not going to be a quick fix for the sexual assault and the sexual violence that plagues our community, white supremacy that plagues our community, and all of the injustice that we see. But when we have these type of dialogues, and we have, as you see on the screen, people of different ages, backgrounds, sexual orientations coming together for this cause, this is the hope that we need. Again, if we look at history, if we look at the civil rights movement, if we look at the LGBT movement, it was started by people of all races coming to the common ground that justice and liberation has to be had by all. So know that if you're feeling like, I don't know what to do, pick up a book or do what you're doing today, and we already have the answers. We just need to open up our hearts and our minds and understand that we don't have the answers. Myself, even though I am a queer Black woman, I still am an ally to trans Black women. And I wanted to center trans Black women because even though we talk about sexual assault and LGBT in two different compartments, we do see a lot of sexual assault in our community. And a lot of people are afraid to step in because they, number one, don't know about the LGBT community. Number two, don't know really how to be effective allies, co-conspirators, and actually get help. And so I say to you, if you are a survivor and you are LGBT, to reach out to either LACASA or Equality Michigan. I have information that I know they'll share ongoing, but know that there's help for you, and know that this film will actually help empower you to know that you're not alone. And if you want to reach out, our number is 313-537-7000. And it's only a small group of us, but again, I want to encourage you. It's 3 of us, including one of my advocates. She is amazing. Her name is Janice Poindexter. She is a Black trans woman. And the reason why I bring her up is because many people right now, many of my white brothers and sisters feel as if I don't know what to do to be an ally. But myself, I'm an ally to my advocate and my friend and my sister who's transgender. Is it scary sometimes to not understand what she goes through every day, knowing that her lifetime rate is 35? The average transgender woman, Black woman, or woman of color, average life expectancy is 35. That's nothing that I can ever understand. But what I do is I ask her questions, and I actually step back. If I don't know or she needs to be in a space, I send to her. I let her teach me, but I also learn myself. So I say that to you to know that there's hope. Know that if you want training on LGBT, intersectionality, any of those things, I've already reached out to Nicole. Me and Nicole are already like email and phone and having phone conversations, but know that there is hope overall. And I know there's a ton of Zooms in the world, but I'm glad you're here with us. I'm glad that you are staying encouraged. Know that this is Pride Month, so the fact that this is being held now is wonderful. And of course, I would be remiss if I didn't really, recognize that Pride Month started from a rebellion. And that is what we're doing. That's what the Me Too movement did. That is what we're doing with Black Lives Matter. That is what we're doing. We're all doing the same work, and we can do it together. And so I'm just excited for what's going to happen. As I shared, I'm a mother of a 5-year-old little Black girl. And I've already started teaching her about the importance of body autonomy, the importance of all these things. And I know I'm not going to have all the right answers, but it's all about our intentions here. And I know that we're going to have some uncomfortable conversations, but if it's based on love, trust, and mutual respect, it's okay to get it right, and it's okay to get it wrong. But we have to cancel out that call out culture and bring each other in. And so I'm so excited that we're going to have a panel, we're going to have a discussion, so I can continue on in helping learn from my esteemed panel members and from you all and from the film. But I just want to say, again, I'm honored. Again, keep hope alive. Know that your silence will not protect you. So that is why you're here, to learn actions for us to go forward. And thank you all for listening to me and giving me your space and your time, and I am honored.
Thank you so much, Nicole. I will be transitioning us now to the film, The Bystander Moment by Jackson Katz. Following the film, we will hold a panel discussion with pre-prepared questions, and if we have time at the end, we would love to hear from the audience. So throughout the film, I invite you all to use the Q&A section at the bottom of your screen. If there are questions that you would like to address the panel with, please enter them here. One of our staff members will be monitoring this box. I'd also like to provide you with a quick trigger warning for this film, as there is heavy discussion surrounding sexual assault and some violent images shown throughout. Please do what you need to do to take care of you. Thank you.
The
flood of accusations.
Several allegations of sexual harassment against movie producer Harvey Weinstein.
Weinstein is facing serious allegations of sexual harassment. Explosive new allegations tonight.
Harvey Weinstein charged with rape and sexual assault in New York.
More than 60 women have come forward to accuse Weinstein of sexual harassment, assault, and rape. A sight dozens of his accusers had hoped for, but thought would never come. Harvey Weinstein turning himself into New York City police.
Harvey, what do you have to say about the 2004 allegations?
When Harvey Weinstein was outed as a serial sexual abuser of women, it shined a spotlight on a whole range of other high-profile men,
Growing line of high-profile
including Roger Ailes at Fox News,
Roger Ailes is out.
high-profile men in Silicon Valley, on Wall Street,
Flood of accusations.
and a whole range of other men across media culture.
Bill O'Reilly out.
Matt Lauer out at NBC.
Charlie Rose fired.
The head of CBS is out. Entertainment mogul Russell Simmons stepping down.
When all these high-profile men were outed, it brought sexual assault and domestic violence into the public conversation in a way that's unprecedented, and actually catalyzed the Me Too movement.
Stop the violence! Stop the rape!
Hundreds of women marched yesterday along the Hollywood Walk of Fame.
The march was centered around the hashtag #MeToo movement.
The Me Too movement is an incredible outpouring of women's voices, both in the United States and all over the world.
What we represent is a reminder, a living, breathing reminder that we are human beings, not hashtags.
It's building on literally a half century of incredible activism and work by women. This is work that's been done by women across class, race, ethnicity, building the battered women's movement, building the sexual assault movements and the movements against sexual harassment.
No more rape! No more rape!
This abuse had been going on for centuries, for millennia. But because of social media and other forms of communication, women and young women have had a voice in a way that they didn't previously.
Their stories flooded social media and painted a picture of just how many people endure sexual abuse and harassment every day.
And now they're being heard and talking about their experiences.
It happened to me too.
Me too.
It happened to me too.
And it happened to me too.
It's my truth and no one can take that away from me. It's my story.
And one of the most important things that's happened with the Me Too movement is it's not just shined a spotlight on perpetrators like Harvey Weinstein, but it's rather focused some attention on the people around those men and the role that they have played in participating in the culture that produces this abusive behavior.
Lena Dunham just said too many men are silent about sexism in Hollywood. And has that silence enabled men like Harvey?
It's not just these men who were acting in this bad way, but it was also an entire culture that supports them.
Telling them to be quiet and silent.
Why didn't anybody say anything? Lies within every story we've seen written for the last 2 months, which is that I wasn't going to be the one to take this person on.
How do you get the change of the silent bystander to move into that engaged bystander?
And there's an emerging discussion about the role of the friends and the colleagues and the peers in these workplaces and other places who are around these perpetrators, and how so few people spoke up, how so few people challenged and interrupted the abusive behavior, how they participated in a culture that sustained that kind of abuse. And in fact, it's important to remember that this focus on bystanders didn't come out of nowhere either. One of the most important developments in the field of gender violence prevention over the past quarter century has been this focus on the bystander, the friends, the teammates, the colleagues, and co-workers. But it's really important to note that there are different approaches to how you work with the bystander. And it's crucial to think about these differences because they matter. Because if we want to be truly transformative in this moment, in this incredible moment, there are ways of thinking about the bystander that are more effective than others.
weeks ago today, 20 minutes after 3 in the morning, it was a dark night. Kitty Genovese, 28 years old, drove her car into this parking lot at the Kew Gardens station of the Long Island Railroad that she'd been doing for a year. She stopped, saw a man against the wall. She didn't quite make it halfway down the block before the killer drove a knife into her.
When people hear the word bystander, they think about the Kitty Genovese case in 1964 in New York City.
15 years ago, a young woman was stabbed to death in front of a Queens, New York apartment, half a block from her home.
Tomorrow marks what many people regard as one of the most shameful anniversaries in New York City history.
Police discovered that more than 30 people had witnessed her attack, and no one had picked up the phone to call the police.
When Kitty Genovese was murdered by Winston Moseley on the streets outside of her Queens apartment complex, and then supposedly nobody called the police, that propelled a whole cottage industry of studies and social psychological inquiry into the bystander effect and why people don't act when they see someone in duress on the streets.
Unknown to these passersby, Peter is an actor. As part of an experiment on bystander apathy, he's pretending to be ill. How long before he gets help?
There's certain kind of social psychological explanations for why people don't intervene. For example, this concept of the diffusion of responsibility, like I'm waiting for somebody else to act, therefore I'm not going to act.
The woman is on the ground and you can see the man repeatedly slapping her and punching the victim.
Or when people don't act when they see something happening on the streets, it's often because they're afraid of the potential repercussions.
There's at least 10 individuals that are standing around watching this, approximately 5 males that are watching this, and no one is intervening in a female being beat this way.
I don't want to jump in and be a hero and just get hurt.
The problem with talking about the bystander effect is that that has to do with strangers seeing something happening to strangers on the street. When we talk about the bystander approach, we're not talking about strangers on the street, we're talking about known peer cultures. We're talking about when they're in peer cultures where they know people, why don't they act? And the reason why, generally speaking, why people don't act in their own peer culture is not because of their physical fear, it's because of their social fear.
Hey, let's go grind on some whores, bro.
When a young guy doesn't speak up and challenge his friend who's just made a sexist joke, it's not because he's worried about getting assaulted, although there are some instances where in male peer cultures men are actually physically afraid of each other. It's because they're afraid of the social consequences, that they might be seen as soft, that they might be seen as not being one of the guys. Somehow their status within the peer culture might be affected. The most disturbing manifestation of these kind of dynamics happens in gang rapes.
The gang rape of a 16-year-old girl took place outside a Richmond High School homecoming dance.
2 high school football stars from Steubenville, Ohio, sexually assaulted a visibly intoxicated 16-year-old girl. How could so many all-American kids stand by and let this happen without anyone calling for help?
Gang rapes are often initiated by 1 or 2 guys, and they pull in other guys to participate with them, and the pressure on these other guys to participate in this abusive, very abusive criminal act is intense in that moment. One of the most famous examples of these dynamics happened in the so-called Big Dan's rape case in New Bedford, Massachusetts in the early 1980s. A feature film called The Accused with Jodie Foster was made based on that incident, and it was the first time in the mainstream that we examined as a culture the role of the bystander.
Hey, Kurt, you a faggot, Kurt! You a faggot! Don't let him talk to you like that! Baby, you a faggot? You pulled out your pants, we'll see silk panties out!
The woman in many of these gang rape situations is completely dehumanized and depersonalized and objectified. They're not thinking about her as a person. They're thinking about the dynamic of what's going on between the guys. They're sharing an experience together, the guys are. And a lot of guys don't have the self-confidence in that moment of truth to say, this is wrong, you cannot do this. She's vulnerable, she's drunk, she's passed out, what are you doing? And so violence doesn't just cause silence in its victims. It also causes a lot of other silence, including the silence of people around the victim or the target, and it causes silence in people around the perpetrator. And the bystander approach, if done well, is an effective strategy of helping people to think about ways in which they can break their complicit silence.
Before this day is over, something very ugly is going to happen to hundreds of American women. It is a deliberate act of violence. It is one of the fastest growing crimes in this country, and any woman could become its victim.
Back in the 70s and 80s, most approaches to gender violence prevention focused almost exclusively on instructing women how to avoid being assaulted.
There are many things in your purse that can be effective weapons. A teasing brush or a rat tail comb, for example.
So you had educational videos talking about self-defense tactics women could use to fight off potential rapists.
Some people carry tear gas, mace, horn alarms, and even hairspray for self-defense.
They were essentially public safety type education campaigns.
A good start is to put only your last name and initials on the mailbox. A strong lock is a good investment. If you have to walk alone at night, stay out in the open, near light and people.
This was called prevention, but it was really risk reduction under the name of prevention. Later, there's a whole new set of precautions that start to be laid out in prevention education campaigns. Don't put your drink down at a party, for example, because a guy might drop a rape drug in your drink.
One of these in her drink, she won't even know what hit her.
Again, notice how the focus is almost entirely on women, what they can and should do to be safe and to avoid being raped.
You can't blame someone's clothing for your own behavior. There's only one person who's responsible for your actions.
And when men and boys were focused on back in the day, it was almost always as perpetrators or potential perpetrators.
Attacking, because that's what it is, or hurting someone else, first of all, is a criminal act and is able to be prosecuted. That's for openers.
And the problem with that focus on men and young men is that most men don't see themselves in that way, and they tune you out. They shut you down, and they think, I'm a good guy, I don't rape women, this isn't my problem. And my goal was to get guys to buy in, to get young men to think about ways in which they could be constructive parts of the solution. When I started the Mentors in Violence Prevention program in the early 90s, it was at a place called the Center for the Study of Sport and Society, which was an institution at Northeastern that had been created in 1984 with the idea of using the sports culture as a constructive way to address a range of social problems. The center was known for addressing racism through the vehicle of sports. And, you know, there's a huge history in the 20th century and the 21st century of sport being used as a catalyst to address social issues and social problems. For example, Muhammad Ali, who was the icon of the 20th century in using sport as a platform for his social justice activism and work.
Policemen pull black people over and hit them across the head and unjustly try them in courts. And none of the good white folks can be found to help. When Jackie Robinson stepped on the field for the Brooklyn Dodgers in 1947, that wasn't just a moment in sports history, it was a moment in American history, and therefore in world history, because sports is much bigger than just the playing fields.
No way a woman can play tennis with a good man tennis player. This is a battle of the sexes.
When Billie Jean King became an icon of women's strength in athletics.
Why shouldn't everyone have the opportunity? And the only way you can do it is by changing the system.
People say, are you more proud of what you did on the court or off? Much more off the court. And I'm going to continue this until my last breath to try to fight for equality and freedom for all.
That was important beyond the sports culture itself because of what sports signifies. And, you know, when Colin Kaepernick took a knee and NFL players are taking a knee, that's an important development in an approach to activism that has a long and proud history in the 20th and early 21st centuries. And when I approached Richard Lapchick, the director of the center at the time, I knew all about this history. And my thinking was, where are we going to find more men who have the courage and the strength to start standing up and speaking out against men's violence against women? Where are we going to find more men and young men who will challenge and interrupt other men's sexism at all levels, not just at the point of attack, but at all levels? Where are we going to do that? Well, one place we're going to do that is in the sports culture.
Lunging down.
I wanted to work in the sports culture, not because there was a problem in athletics of male athletes assaulting women. My thinking was, where are we going to find more men and young men who have the courage and the strength and self-confidence to stand up and speak out on these matters? And if we can get men who already have some status in their peer culture to speak out, it'll make it more acceptable and easier for other men and young men to do so. So I was thinking about using the sports culture in a very constructive way. At the time, I had a professor in graduate school by the name of Ron Slaby, who along with his colleagues was looking at an approach to middle school bullying prevention that moved beyond the perpetrator-victim binary. The goal was to get the kids around the kid doing the bullying to make it clear to that kid that what he or she was doing was not acceptable, not because they were going to get in trouble with the authority figures, like some external agent of authority was going to come into the peer culture and remove the offending party, but because the kids in the peer culture itself, we're going to say to that kid and make it clear to that kid that what he or she is doing is unacceptable to the kids themselves, and that they would not tolerate that kind of abusive behavior. And they called that approach the bystander approach. And one of the beauties of that approach is that it gave us a really powerful thing to say to men and young men who will often say, this is not my problem, this is not my issue, I don't harass women, I don't abuse women. Some guys do, but not me, I'm a good guy. It gave us a way to speak to those guys to say, you do have something to do here. You are part of the solution to this problem. We need you to start thinking about ways that you can challenge and interrupt abusive behavior at all levels by men and young men around you. That's the bystander approach. So the question was, how can we change the peer culture sort of support for abusive behavior, the kind of ways in which guys goad each other on, the way that guys enable each other's abusive behavior, but in particular, the way that men's silence contributes to perpetration of abuse. In other words, when men who are not happy with and who don't support abusive behavior remain silent in the face of it, how does that silence function as consent and complicity in the abusive behavior? All of this informed our thinking in the early stages of the MVP program.
MVP trainers are a diverse group of former college and professional athletes who are able to connect with current athletes in highly effective ways.
We didn't want to just reproduce the same old, focus on victims and potential victims and targets of harassment and abuse, and we didn't want to just focus on men as perpetrators and potential perpetrators. We wanted to expand the palette, if you will. We wanted to expand the focus to all the men in particular who are in peer cultures with men who might be abusive, to get them to speak up and challenge and interrupt abusive behavior by their peers, their teammates, their classmates, their fraternity brothers, and others.
That's how we look at the bystander approach, which is, it's not about you being a perpetrator or you being a victim. It's about you changing the whole situation, using who you are.
It's not the easy thing to do. It's not the popular thing to do a lot of times. But what we always ask people to consider is it the right thing to do? We're not talking like the Superman, John Wayne, Rambo version of a bystander. It's okay, what are some thinking ways that I can deal with the situation that isn't going to get anybody hurt?
A lot of people don't take these type of situations serious until it hits home. And when it hits home, that's when it hits the hardest. Yeah. So, I mean, if it was somebody else's mother, sister, daughter, she always try to help.
So we create these incredibly robust interactive dialogues. We don't have a PowerPoint presentation. We don't tell people what to think. Obviously, the trainers and the facilitators know a whole lot, but part of their goal is to get people to speak up and talk about real-life situations. Why would somebody in this situation do this, but you would do that? What are some of the different approaches that you see in this room? And we get people to have dialogue and talk honestly about the complexities of race and ethnicity and sexual orientation and gender and how it's all intersecting and marbled together. And sometimes people disagree with each other. In fact, very often they disagree with each other. But I don't think that creating some false consensus is our goal. The goal is to get people thinking critically about their responsibilities to themselves and others. Initially, the focus was only on male peer cultures, because if you're in a position to challenge and interrupt abusive behavior by members of your group and you remain silent, then in a sense, your silence is a form of consent and complicity in the perpetration of abusive behavior by members of your group. So, for example, if you're a white person and you yourself don't act out in racist ways, but you don't challenge and interrupt other white people who are acting out in racist ways, in a sense, your silence is a form of consent and complicity in their racism. Just like if you're a man and you're in a position to challenge and interrupt other men's sexism, but you choose to remain silent, then in a sense your silence is a form of consent and complicity in those men's sexism. That's the premise of the MVP bystander approach in working with men. In the second year of the MVP model, this is again back in the early 1990s, we were being approached by all kinds of athletic directors and athletic officials in the groups that we were working with, and they were saying, okay, you're working with men, but what can we do with the women? Women have an important role to play, don't they? And how can we integrate women into this approach? So we started focusing on women, not as the victims or potential victims of harassment, abuse, or violence, not as the perpetrators of that, but as bystanders. In other words, how can they be empowered to challenge, interrupt abuse, to support victims and survivors? Because there's many ways in which women play a role in perpetuating some of the attitudes and beliefs that lead to abusive behavior. And so in MVP sessions, we help women think about the ways in which some of their attitudes and beliefs and behaviors contribute to the problem.
You know, whether female or male, they're going to be bystanders to different situations. And really, this training is about empowering them, giving them tools to stand up and be leaders in tough situations and to sort of be the activists that change a culture on campus.
So in that sense, all of us, men, women, and then, of course, gender nonconforming folks and everybody, how everybody in a given peer culture can play a constructive role in challenging abuse, in supporting victims and survivors, and helping to create a climate where the abuse doesn't take place in the first place. And over the years, MVP has grown to work with all kinds of different sectors of society, including all branches of the United States military, in the corporate workplace, in the blue-collar workplace. It's in several countries as well. But an important distinction between our approach and some other approaches is that we didn't just focus on the point of attack. In fact, what's happened in the field is that some people have moved toward a more bystander intervention model that is much more about the point of intervention. In other words, like, if you see something, say something, like the TSA in airports. The problem there is they leave out the underlying attitudes, beliefs, and behaviors that are at the foundation of these abusive acts, and they just talk about the act itself and intervening at the point of attack. And I think that honestly, that is more like a glorified nightclub bouncer training. Now, of course, we want people to speak up if they see an incident of harassment or abuse or a potential rape scenario taking place in their college campus or something. Of course we want people to speak up. But to think that somehow that's the solution, to just figure out ways to interrupt a rape in progress, is absurd. And I'll give you an example of some of the confusion that people have about the term bystander intervention. It's the Stanford rape case.
Students at Stanford University are in shock tonight after hearing about an alleged rape on campus. The suspect, Brock Turner,
who was a member of the swimming team at Stanford University, was assaulting this woman who was passed out, and 2 Swedish graduate students were riding their bicycles across campus. They saw what was happening and intervened.
According to university police, the witnesses chased him down, then restrained him until police arrived.
It's obviously a really scary thing to hear that kind of stuff happens on campus, but I'm really proud of the students who stepped up and stopped it.
They didn't stop the rape from happening. The rape had already happened. But the point is, what is the theory, the educational practice, if you will, that flows from the example of the Stanford rape case? That we need more Swedish graduate students riding bicycles across campus because they might come across a rape, because that clearly worked in that situation. I mean, it's silly. It's ridiculous. Of course we want people to intervene at all points, but the idea that somehow that's the solution to this problem, that's like a form of whack-a-mole. It's like you see a situation arises, you address it. You see another situation arise and you address it, as opposed to, let's talk honestly and openly about all the underlying dynamics that contribute to these problems.
Rapists like dark and lonely streets where they can search out an unwary victim.
The old idea was that somehow individual perpetrators just came into town and did their nasty business and then retreated back into the darkness. That's such a naive way of understanding what is a much more systematic social problem, both here in the United States and all over the world. The idea that somehow this just comes out of nowhere, or that just individuals are perpetrating it but it has no connection to larger social norms and cultural norms, is absurd. That's why the concept of rape culture is so important and instructive.
Hey baby, why don't you smile?
That skirt is way too short.
You shouldn't have had so much to drink.
Real men always want to have sex.
Listen her up with the drink.
Men can't be raped.
Boys will be boys. Girl, your body is bad.
Did you lead him on?
She's totally asking. Why can't you take a compliment?
Why didn't you fight back?
America, we need to talk about rape culture. 1 in 5 women are sexually assaulted.
The concept of rape culture is that there are various attitudes, beliefs, and behaviors that are marbled into normative social practice in a given society. One of the things we've used to illustrate this is a pyramid. Imagine the tip of the pyramid is an incident of sexual assault, sexual harassment, domestic violence, or relationship abuse. But the base of the pyramid is a set of attitudes, beliefs, and behaviors that create the cultural context and foundation for that abusive act to take place. The real hard work is focusing not at the tip of the pyramid, but at the base, where it gets more messy down there. Most people will agree, well, if I see a rape, of course I'm going to intervene. If I see my guy friend beating up his girlfriend, of course I'm going to do something about it. But then you say, well, what about when he makes a sexist comment? What about when your guy friend does something that you can see clearly is part of the problem, but it's not an actual incident of violence and abuse? Would you then challenge him on that? And a lot of guys will push back on that and say, well, no, I really wouldn't say anything on that situation. But we're trying to get them to think about how, if you don't challenge people at the lower levels, if you don't challenge people who make sexist comments, who make dismissive comments about girls or women, then in a sense, you're helping to sustain the culture that produces that abusive act at the tip of the pyramid.
Wow.
beautiful. Have a good day.
The other point here is it's not just about rape itself.
Somebody's acknowledging you. She's an
Rape is on the extreme of a continuum of behaviors. Catcalls on the street.
No catcalling signs like this one are popping up all over New York City. So what are your thoughts on catcalling?
You know, sometimes, you got to call a girl. You got, something like that.
How would you call a dog?
Same way.
Groping and unwanted touch on public transportation.
This guy just straight up grabbed my ass. He pushes me against the wall and he grabs my breast.
The next thing I know, I feel a hand up my skirt.
I pushed him away. I said, "What the hell do you think you're doing?"
I pushed him away from me with all my force.
And he looks at me, he stares at me in the eye with this smirk.
And he looked at me and he smirked at me.
And he just sort of smiled smugly and walked away. And I think that most women who've been assaulted know this look, which is the I'm getting off on you being uncomfortable.
Basically like, I just did that to you and I can, and there's nothing you can do about it.
We also have victim blaming more generally.
She is leaving her home at 1 a.m. in the morning, and nobody forced her to drink. What did she expect to happen at 1 a.m. in the morning after sneaking out? I'm not saying that she deserved to be raped, but...
This guy thinks the cat call was our model's fault. But when Lisa wanted to ask him what he meant...
Sir, you just said that a lady was asking for it.
He didn't stick around. This guy did, to tell us he was upset that we were recording the cat calls.
You got a woman walking around looking to get talked to, get somebody to say something. Look what you did, look what you did.
Let me ask you a question. If that was your daughter, how would you feel about men yelling at her?
Walk around. My daughter wouldn't walk around willing to get yelled at. My daughter walk around conservatively dressed.
We also have unsolicited dick pics and revenge porn.
Revenge porn bust. A man accused of spending months stalking his ex-girlfriend online and posting her naked pictures.
It's a betrayal of trust by technology. Intimate images shared on the internet without consent of those pictured.
Many of these women are having their photos sent deliberately to their employers, to their family members, to their co-workers, as a means of causing them harm.
It's a very modern form of misogyny, and it's taking away our control of our own bodies and our control of images of our own bodies, which is what the women's movement has always been about. We get to decide what we're going to do with our bodies.
There's the kind of cyberbullying and sexual harassment that takes place online and social media.
For Anita Sarkeesian, this is the new normal. Armed escorts at public events, tracking her every move. All because this media critic dared to criticize something millions of us play every day: video games. Her goal? To bring attention to what she calls the inherent misogyny in the gaming world.
It gets worse and worse. It reinforces this idea of women as playthings for their amusement.
And it's this kind of talk that makes her a target.
And that's when the sort of cyber mob, right, the hate mob descended.
Bombarding her with mostly anonymous tweets and messages. I will rape you when I get the chance. Hiding behind usernames and claims of free speech. I'm sitting outside your apartment with a loaded gun. Your neighbors won't hear you screaming in pain.
Trolling is disturbing in itself, but when it's becoming a part of our public discourse that women are made fun of for their bodies, for their sexuality, and are diminished in that way because of that, instead of being taken seriously, I think that's something for not just journalists or women to think about, but for us all to think about.
Facebook, Twitter, Instagram. They've made us a society of stalkers.
If you want to see just how powerful these dynamics are, just look at our entertainment culture. In show after show, you see what it's like for young people to navigate the pressures of social media, especially the shaming that goes on around young women's sexuality.
Okay, everyone, settle in. Today we're discussing ways to navigate difficult interactions.
The pressures that social media have brought into kids' lives are so great that movies like Unfriended have turned our social networks into horror franchises.
Dude, look.
It's Laura.
With the rise of social media, peer cultures have now widened exponentially into cyberspace. So young people now have to contend with a growing universe of sexism and misogynist statements online. The bottom line is there's so many behaviors that maybe fall short of rape, but are a part of rape culture.
I feel stupid that I am just now realizing that a lot of us men in America have been raised on rape culture.
And a lot of guys now get all this.
Rape culture is perpetuated through the use of misogynistic language and the objectification of women's bodies and the glamorization of sexual violence. My brothers, if we are being morally honest with ourselves, if you are a certain age like I am, you was born in the late 70s or 80s or hell, older than that, you are absolutely, positively raised on rape culture. I don't care if it was Freaknik, Miami Memorial Weekend, Myrtle Beach. It was never normal to feel like you can grab a woman's ass. It was never normal to grab a woman's breast. Just because, you know, you saw in Dr. Dre's Nothing But a G-Thing video when the girl was playing volleyball and they ran up behind her and pulled her bikini top off. If you ever mimicked that kind of behavior, it wasn't normal. It was rape culture, okay? Movies like Revenge of the Nerds.
I want to do it.
Remember those where guys would dress up as other people in order to trick the woman to have sex with them?
Take off your mask. You're so kinky. You're that nerd.
Yeah. That was rape culture. Remember Porky's?
When they're not in class, they're into everything.
They want us to look. They want us to look.
Porky.
Remember sneaking up late to watch Porky's where they was drilling holes in the wall and peeping at the girls? I'm sorry, my brothers. All of that was rape culture. I feel bad and extremely dumb that I didn't realize this earlier in my life.
And again, the point here is that you have to talk about the norms that produce those behaviors if you're going to really make substantive change. In fact, there's been a global consensus for a number of years that the most effective programming with men, young men and boys on these matters is what's called gender transformative programming. Gender transformative programming means that you're allowing men, young men and boys to think about ways in which cultural ideologies of manhood affect their attitudes, beliefs, and behaviors, both towards women, towards other men, and towards themselves. And yet, some of the people who run programs that want to prevent gender violence don't want to talk about gender. They just want to talk about how everybody has a role to play, but not talk about the underlying gender norms. To me, that's absurd. And I understand why, because I think people are afraid of men getting defensive and pushing back.
If you just say to me, you don't acknowledge the rape culture, again, I need you to define that, and I need you to explain to me what I did. And I go, really? I didn't do anything.
But if you don't engage this discussion, if it's gender neutral, and you're only teaching them skills to intervene in situations of potential harm, you're not necessarily doing damage, but you're not being transformative. And I think in this moment in time, in the 21st century, we need to be transformative. These are giant problems we're dealing with, both in the United States and all over the world. And if we're just keeping it at the surface, we're just skimming the surface, I think we're doing a disservice to young men, to young women, and we're not doing what we say we want to be doing, which is transforming the culture that produces abusive behavior.
Stop crying. Stop with the tears.
Don't cry.
Pick yourself up. Stop with the emotion.
Don't be a pussy.
Don't let nobody disrespect you. Be cool and be kind of a dick.
Always keep your mouth
Nobody
shut.
likes a tattletale.
Bros come before hoes.
Don't let your woman run your life.
You bitch.
What a fag. Get laid. Do something.
Be a man.
Be a man.
Grow some balls.
I don't think it's nice you laughing.
For decades, the culture, especially our entertainment culture, has normalized and glamorized a definition of manhood that equates being a real man with the ability to impose your will on another person through your physical force and displays of dominance.
Godfather, I don't know what to do. I don't know what to do.
You can act like a man!
What does it mean to be a man? Being able to handle your business. A man don't cry. A man don't ask for help.
Never show weakness.
A man don't even go to the doctor.
Never show weakness. Only pain that matters is the pain you inflict.
You the hottest bitch in this place.
And we also have attitudes that glamorize sexual conquest by men or the objectification of women.
I've begun the feast a bit early, and this is the first of many courses.
And having sex with as many women as possible.
Since we're short on time, come on, girls.
And at the same time, it's been the cultural norm to question the masculinity of guys who don't play the game.
And you didn't bang her? Are you gay?
To make them somehow seem abnormal, less than a real man.
You're gay now? No, I'm not gay. I'm just celibate.
As if the only way for a guy to be into women is to have sex with them.
The best thing to do with this Corning stone, keep her in line, is better quick. Oh, that behind is driving me loco. I'm like a night wolf. Oh!
Guys, take it easy. Just take it easy. She's got feelings, too.
What? Oh, my God. Well, listen to Burgundy. He's gone soft on us like some schoolboy bitch.
You sound like a gay.
Hey, come on.
And you see this kind of thing across media culture, even in our political culture.
You know, the message I have, it's a very simple one. It's a bumper sticker, Sean. The era of the pajama boy is over January 20th, and the alpha males are back.
You see this on networks where they absolutely love to sort of valorize so-called alpha males and trash and ridicule so-called beta males.
Are you ready for the rise of the beta male? Take a look at the latest cover of The Hollywood Reporter.
Hollywood and leftism wants to replace the alpha male with this beta male.
I look at that cover and I don't know if women are really attracted to beta males. I certainly don't find them attractive. I'm married to a lumberjack, so I obviously like alpha males.
The modern beta male wusses in the feminist minds, they freak out and they form a mob and they go crazy.
But this isn't just pundits spouting off on cable news networks. This phenomena extends to the most powerful sectors of our society, including the corridors of power in politics.
I like Trump because Trump is not a politician. He talks like a guy. And ladies out there, this is what guys talk about when you're not around. So if you're offended by it, grow up.
So one of the most important things we do in MVP sessions is we take into account all these forces, the media culture, the porn culture, the influences of the political world and everything else, and have this be part of the discussion. And we help people think about how we define manhood and womanhood, how gender norms operate and intersect with race, class, ethnicity, sexuality, how power functions within these peer cultures and the larger society, how certain kinds of relationships and certain kinds of power relationships are normalized in media culture and porn culture. If you have all of that as your object of discussion, of critical commentary, you're, I think, much more likely to come at positive, transformative solutions. The concept here is changing social norms, and that might seem like an abstract concept, but there's many examples that we can see of how social norms have changed. Take cigarette smoking, for example.
Every day, more and more people are discovering something extra in smoking pleasure.
For decades, we lived in a culture that made smoking not only seem perfectly normal, but also glamorous, fun, even healthy.
Yes, according to this survey, more doctors smoke Camels than any other cigarette.
As a result, cigarette smoking used to be much, much more common, and people would do it in doctors' offices, on airplanes. It was extremely common, but what happened was that the norms of the society changed as we became more educated and started to ask questions.
When friends don't stop friends from drinking and driving.
Another example, drunk driving.
Friends die from drinking and driving.
Starting in the 80s, you had this slogan, friends don't let friends drive drunk.
Friends don't let friends drive drunk.
So in other words, they were saying to people who are friends of a person who might get behind the wheel of a car, it's actually a smart thing to do, it's actually an empowered thing to do, and it's actually a friendship thing to do to take the keys away from your friend. And in fact, these kind of campaigns have helped to shape and change the social norms of how we act and how we interact. So the idea that somehow we can't do this with sexual assault or domestic violence or relationship abuse is not true. Now, let me just say, it's a little more complicated when it comes to domestic and sexual violence issues, because those aren't just about particular behaviors around the purchase and consumption of a product or smoking a cigarette. It's about gender identity and sexual identity, which is on a deeper level. And so there's always going to be fierce blowback against people who are trying to challenge the rape culture and so-called toxic masculinity.
Macho men under attack at college campuses across the country, now encouraging men to be less manly with courses to fight toxic masculinity. What could be toxic? about all this.
You have a legion of people who love to caricature those who believe there might be larger cultural norms at play that help reinforce sexual abuse as somehow trying to bring down masculinity.
Basically, what feminism has delivered is angry women and feminine men. From the left, from the politically correct, we have all these attacks on men. It's a very hard time to be a man in today's society.
They'll be like, what are you trying to do? Make men soft? You trying to make men weak?
Wimps and wussies deliver mediocrity.
And I think this is ridiculous. We're not trying to undermine men's strength. We're trying to define strength differently. In other words, if strength is just the ability to impose your will on another person through your physical force and displays of dominance, is that really your understanding of strength in the 21st century? Are you kidding me? Strength is about strength of character. Strength is not just physical courage, it's moral courage, it's social courage, it's having the strength to stand up to bullies, it's having the strength even when your voice is cracking to say to your friend, hey, dude, the way you're talking about girls or women is uncool. That takes great strength. And the idea that somehow we're undermining men's sense of themselves as powerful or leaders is ridiculous. It has it literally topsy-turvy. And in fact, I always define the MVP model not as a bystander program, but as a gender violence prevention leadership program that uses the bystander approach as one of its tools. Because you know what? A bystander who speaks up, a teammate, a friend, a classmate, a colleague who interrupts or challenges another person's abusive behavior or even a sexist comment is actually acting as a leader does.
MVP means Mentors in Violence Prevention, and it is a gender-based education and leadership program.
One of the foundations that we try and lay from the beginning of any MVP session is to try and ground the group in the concept of leadership, but also the concept of what it means to be looking out for one another.
A bystander who speaks up, an active bystander, is not a soft person by any stretch of the imagination. They're actually a leader. And you can be a leader even if you don't have a formal title as a leader. You can be a 16-year-old kid who has no resume items whatsoever that make it look like they're a leader. But by speaking up, speaking truth to power, interrupting a sexist comment or a racist statement or a homophobic statement, that's an act of leadership. Now, one example of men's strength and men's leadership we can see is General David Morrison, who was the highest-ranking member of the Australian Army, second highest-ranking member of the Australian military. And there was a scandal that happened where a group of junior officers and junior enlisted leaders, all of them were men, were making a series of really sexist Facebook posts referring to their fellow female soldiers in completely derogatory, inappropriate, and sexually degrading ways.
Tonight, the ABC 7:30 revealed that hundreds of abusive messages have been posted on a private Facebook site used exclusively by more than 1,000 current and former Australian soldiers.
Fodder for the enemy. You break contact drill. Leave female soldier behind wearing bikini. LOL.
Don't worry about what the enemy will do to them. If you're on ops and get rubbish, who carries the tampon and sanitary napkins bag?
General Morrison made a videotaped statement in response to this scandal that went out to all the members of the Australian Army in response, and then it went viral beyond. And he said some very powerful things in his statement.
Those who think that it is okay to behave in a way that demeans or exploits their colleagues have no place in this army. On all operations, female soldiers and officers have proven themselves worthy of the best traditions of the Australian Army. They are vital to us maintaining our capability now and into the future. If that does not suit you, then get out. You may find another employer where your attitude and behaviour is acceptable, but I doubt it. The same goes for those who think that toughness is built on humiliating others. Every one of us is responsible for the culture and reputation of our army and the environment in which we work. If you become aware of any individual degrading another, then show moral courage and take a stand against it. No one has ever explained to me how the exploitation or degradation of others enhances capability or honours the traditions of the Australian Army. The standard you walk past is the standard you accept. That goes for all of us, but especially those who by their rank have a leadership role. If you're not up to it, find something else to do with your life. There is no place for you amongst this band of brothers and sisters.
The standard you walk past is the standard you accept. That's General Morrison's articulation of the bystander approach. You don't see very many men making a strong statement like that, which is to say, there's certain standards you're going to be expected to adhere to, and if you don't, you're going to be held accountable. Imagine if that wasn't exceptional, but it was normative to hear men talk like that. Imagine how much strength it would give to the young guys in college and high schools who are on a daily basis confronted with situations where they know things are wrong, but they don't want to say anything because they don't want to be called soft or wimps or taking the women's side in the battle between the sexes. In other words, all the ways in which boys and men are silenced in their peer culture. I'm telling you, I think we would see radical diminution of abusive acts. You know, there's a great quote from Martin Luther King that I think brings us all together. He said, "In the end, what'll hurt the most is not the words of our enemies, but the silence of our friends." In the end, what'll hurt the most is not the words of our enemies, but the silence of our friends. And I think a lot of people, including a lot of men, including men, by the way, in sports culture, in military culture, in fraternity culture, in traditional male culture, in other words, a lot of men get all this. In other words, they know that they are being policed into conformity with certain kinds of normative behaviors. If you change those norms and you start identifying the people who speak up and challenge those norms as actually the leaders, the strong people, the most self-confident people, then you're heading into the territory that we want to be in, which is you're really beginning to question some of those underlying norms, and you're starting to empower people in these peer cultures to take a stand against abuse, harassment, and violence.
Welcome back, everybody. Whoops, sorry. My name is Cassie Glover, and I am the youth prevention educator and trained facilitator and trainer in the Mentors in Violence Prevention program. I work to inform students of the issue of dating violence and sexual assault. I teach them early warning signs of what this looks like at each age. I give them tools they need to speak out on these important issues to support survivors, as well as how to talk to adults, help their friends, and receive our services. I will be guiding us through our discussion today. My first question is for Bill Valancourt. Katz discusses many reasons for why people don't intervene or interrupt sexual harassment and sexist behavior in social situations. How do you think focusing on young men's intervention in the conversation will impact societal views of rape culture?
Well, I think what we've seen demonstrates the impact and the importance of public education, because education will increase awareness, which will change attitudes, and which will ultimately change behavior. And that's the only true source of real change, is to change the attitudes that lead to the behavior. And I think, as was discussed in the video, it's something that's been successful in the past, whether you're talking about a social norm like cigarette smoking. I mean, as I grew up, it was common to see people in public on TV and movies, smoking a cigarette. Now you see it in a movie and everybody, is taken aback because that just doesn't seem right. And we've had that same effect in other areas. As they pointed out, drunk driving. I mean, 20 or 30 years ago, drunk driving wasn't considered that big of a deal. It was just something people did, and maybe you got a ticket if you got caught. But I think attitudes have changed, through the public service announcements and the education. Friends don't let friends drive drunk. It changed the attitudes and then led to the change in behavior. I think we've also seen it in the area of domestic violence, something more recent. It used to be thought that domestic violence was a family issue that was no one's business. That attitude has changed, it continues to change. We're not there yet, but we've made progress. And I think that, we've changed the culture in those areas so that behavior is no longer viewed as acceptable. I think we need to do that, and we are doing that in this area, where people know that by changing attitudes and by taking care of each other and intervening when they see things go on, that changes the culture. Now, that it's going to take time, but I think it's efforts like this that really help to bring about that kind of substantive and real change.
Thank you, Bill. My next question, April Woods from Pinckney High School. Katz says violence and abuse create a culture of silence, not only around victims, but also around perpetrators. How does complicit silence impact your work in the community?
Well, when I was reflecting and thinking about that question, it resonated with me when Nicole Denson at the beginning said, it's our job, our responsibility to dismantle silence. So what I really liked is when LACASA came to our school and asked us to pilot the MVP program and laid out what that would entail. And after reading over everything, it was, increasing awareness of the dynamics and those underlying issues of men's violence against women, giving students a time and space to talk and think critically about these issues and empathetically was really powerful to me. And then what I really loved was it wasn't just here you go. We had great training. I was able to have 10 to 15 staff members trained. Cassie comes all the time to our health classes, has really gotten our health teacher on board. He is a 100% advocate. Jeff Sloan is constantly wanting to talk about these difficult conversations. It's really empowered him. We are now in the stage where we have now empowered students to be the leaders of the school, talking about these kinds of situations that they come against when they see them. We had our link crew and our PPI group be trained so that they can train other students in our school and have those conversations. I shouldn't say train other students, but have conversations with other students about these difficult topics. So what is my work in the community? I think it's really allowing students the time and space to talk about these issues, to empower them to think about the different options and interventions that they could take place, that could happen when you're, it comes out of nowhere, it seems like, or daily language, or just things that you might get used to, and then how can you challenge those? And MVP does a really nice job of giving those normal scenarios that you would come up against and allow you that time to think about, how could I react to that? And the thing that I love the most is, somebody told me this a long time ago, being a teacher, the people that talk the most learn the most. So you need to be quiet sometimes and let the kids do the talking. Mm-hmm. And that's what I love about MVP. You're a facilitator, and you can question those, bringing those questions back around to hear their voices some more, because the power comes from, they know they can figure out the answers. They can figure out how to help their peers, not by us telling them what to say or do, but by us listening and guiding. So that's what I think my work is. And Nicole Denson, thank you for that. Now I'm going to have that in my head about dismantling the silence. So I think that's my role in the community.
Yes, thank you, April. Okay, next we have for Christy Bell. Katz points out that many bystander intervention trainings focus on the point of attack, and also discusses why these methods are insufficient when discussing intervention. Was there anything in the film or anything that you've seen in your profession that you feel would help or aid programs that provide bystander intervention trainings?
That's a great question, and I'm going to kind of piggyback a little bit on April and Bill, and even some of the things Nicole Denson brought up at the beginning. Bringing this education in at an early age and starting to teach those different social norms. And that's what I think is really going to start changing how we view everything and having these open discussions. It's amazing to me to think that there's a high school that has this MVP program, and it's changing kids right now and changing their mindsets, especially at a time when we really need that. And to know that that's out there and to be involved with LACASA and knowing that that's available and trying to, me in my position, be able to push some of those programs to really educate these kids on what life doesn't have to be like, and knowing that these social norms don't have to be like that. I do see it very often where a female may come to me with a sexual assault, and because of social, peer culture and the way that they've been raised or the environment, they don't want to say anything. They don't want to do anything because they know that they will be pushed out of their peer culture. And that's not what we need to be doing. We need to be, we talk about empowerment, empowering these kids, empowering people to stand up for what's right. And changing, Katz talks about changing what strength is, redefining strength. And I think that that's exactly what we need to do. And us having discussions and us being able to talk to, having an open communication, it's going to change that culture. It's going to change things and make it a lot better.
Thank you, Christy. For Nicole Denson, why is the consideration and inclusion of intersectionality important for our conversation today, as well as a long-term gender violence prevention program like MVP? Not only focusing on men and women, but also being attentive to differences across race, ethnicity, class, gender, sexual orientation and identity, etc.
So, thank you for that question. Again, I encourage anyone to look up Audre Lorde. Is one of my favorite authors and scholars. And so she had a quote a very long time ago that says, "There is no hierarchy of oppressions." And so when you look at sexual violence, it's on the continuum, right? And so with that being said, so is intersectionality, so is people's identities, like I mentioned earlier. So you have to understand that if it's hard for someone who is cisgender, which means born in the body that they feel is, it's their identity, their gender identity, their expression, cisgender, white, and they still are encountering issues with reporting, with people believing them about being survivors, about having a safe place to go, then think about the level of how hard and the barriers that people of color face, people who are having questions about their immigration status, people who have, low socioeconomic status. Like when you put on those, like you can see that the barriers are even harder. So I'll give you an example. So during the Me Too movement, because I said I've been doing this work for a very long time, so I've seen these different movements, and I've also paid attention how different people respond during these movements. So, and it's all intentional because I want to know how I can reach out to people and engage. And so during that, when we heard about Harvey Weinstein, which was mentioned in the documentary, when we heard about Matt Lauer, a lot of their victims were white. So when we bring up these issues or these barriers that I'm talking about, they're felt even heavier in our cultures or in my culture. So at that time, I decided to speak out about R. Kelly, who was a singer. And no one talked about that, even though, again, it was a 20-year history and a long list of bystanders who did nothing to protect Black women and girls. So I wanted to mention that because that was where my intersectionality showed. A lot of critics were my own Black people. And a lot of Black women told me I shouldn't say anything. Now, what that comes from is from a generational long line of shush, what happens in this house stays in this house. And so I was tearing open a open wound for my culture when I decided to speak out about sexual violence. And so you have to understand that we have to be in these rooms, people of color who are LGBT, because we are navigating. So imagine I navigate those spaces. I navigated holding protests and organizing against R. Kelly, not because of the singer in particular, but the silence around Black women and girls. I say that to say, if I can do that, then anyone can do that. And it's important to know who your allies are, who your co-conspirators. I did not shut white women and men out of the conversation. I chose to lead, and I can't tell you how many people, Black women, Black men, white women, people of all sexual orientations stood by me. But I had to find that tribe because a lot of people had pushback. So once you are in these prevention programs like MVP, who sounds amazing, thank you all for having that program. I've seen the work done in many different ways. It sounds phenomenal. Just know that it's really not only just great to have those spaces, but to have those conversations of your friendships might change. Auntie at the cookout, you might not, you might find out she's a rape apologist, and you might have to take care of yourself to know that once, as a teen, and once you unlearn all of these things in these programs and watching this documentary, that there are safe spaces, but you have to understand that all of us are fighting against patriarchy. We're fighting against all of these isms, but yet starting early, like Officer Bell said, is quintessential to healing, and it's quintessential to passing down better behaviors. And that is what we're doing in the community as LGBT, as people of color, but having those conversations. And so I just wish that when I was younger, I had a school programs like you all did. And I just feel like we continue to have these conversations and continue to lift each other up, and not say, I don't see color, I don't see sexual orientation, I don't see those things, but bringing in transparency is how we get rid of the silence and the fear, is to be honest, even if it's uncomfortable. Because guess what? Talking about sexual assault is uncomfortable. Also, talking about how to change it is uncomfortable, but it's needed.
Thank you so much. I appreciate that. All right, for Nicole Matthews-Creech. What phrases or discussion points have you heard that are commonly used to dismiss and ridicule the idea of rape culture? And how do you think people can respond or educate a person who says these phrases without being off-putting or creating debate? And as my supervisor, you have greatly taught me how to play nice in the sandbox, so I can't wait for you to share this with others.
Well, thanks for the pressure, Cassie. So, right, I mean, a common concept that we talk about in community education and systems change is playing nice in the sandbox. The euphemism always comes to mind of you get more bees with honey, and I think what it boils down to is we're all in different places in our learning about all of this, right? For some of us, the term rape culture has been something that we've been working on, dealing with, understanding, explaining to others for 20 plus years. And that's and there were lots of people that went before me, right, to talk about rape culture. And maybe the name wasn't there back then, but there are also people that are still just hearing the term rape culture for the first time. And so I think it's really critical that when we're having these conversations with others, that we are mindful that everybody is in a different place, in a different space, that they've all had unique experiences, right? We are the people that we are based on our experiences. And those experiences color our perspectives, right, wrong, or indifferent. And so I think it's important to understand where people are at and take everything kind of with a grain of salt. It doesn't mean that you have to agree with what they're saying. It certainly doesn't mean that you are silent in not giving a response, but giving a little bit of empathy and taking a moment to hear where they're at, and then being able to speak from experience contrary maybe to what they've said. When we're dealing with rape culture, we're dealing with a lot of different things, right? It talked a lot about it in the video with the pyramid of things. It's our attitudes, our behaviors, our belief systems. Some of those are so deeply rooted in experiences and culture and family values, right, that it really takes a long time to dismantle and disrupt a lot of those thoughts. You know, when we talk about victim blaming, making a person feel blamed for what it was that happened to them, it's a really big part of our rape culture. And what I really truly believe is that victim blaming in a lot of times, a lot of situations, comes from a person's, the speaker who's maybe blaming the victim for something that has happened. It comes from that person's own sense of security, that person's own sense of safety, their concern for themselves. And so while it's not their intent to blame the victim, it is important to recognize the impact, right? It doesn't matter, but it comes from our own sense of fear and self-protection. So if I can look at someone and say, this is maybe why it happened, right? I don't do that. Let's say a person got drunk to the point where they were stumbling around, and I can look at that and say, I'm not going to do that. Or somebody got in a car with somebody that they didn't necessarily know very well. I wouldn't do that. And so then I can feel safer. And so the intent is not necessarily to blame the victim, but that is the impact. And that severely affects and impacts that person's sense of belief in themselves and sense of safety in themselves. The same thing we can see with kind of the denial of this widespread issue of rape, and that these cases, the downplay of cases that we see, right? So many conversations we hear that, you know, people are saying, well, people lie about it, and it really doesn't happen all that much. There's, you know, these percentages are exploded, or these percentages are elevated to make an impact. And that also really messes with a victim's experience, but it also messes with the rest of society, because again, we feel inaccurately safe and feel that it's not going to happen because it doesn't happen all that often. And so I think when we're talking with folks, it is again important to realize where they're coming from, what their expectations are, what their experiences have taught them, and making sure that you can point out some differences, right? I'm always a big fan of asking questions versus making statements. You know, there's a difference, of course, in asking a statement or asking a question in an accusatory fashion, but a wondering, right? I like to start with, right? Just kind of like, I've heard some different facts about that. I wonder what the best source of information for stuff like that would be. You know, or gosh, you know, I feel like when I was in class the other day, Cassie was here from LACASA, and she was saying something. I feel like that's different than what I'm hearing. Maybe we could go back and look at the fact sheets, or, you know, so I think it all depends on the conversation that you're having with folks, but having an intelligent discourse. And the last thing that I'll say, and this is also a really common conversation that we have in systems change and community education, is there's a huge difference between education and debate, right? We want to educate, we can't debate, because the minute you start debating with somebody, they're on the defensive and you lose them within those first couple of seconds of the conversation, right? So coming from education instead of debate allows for a little bit more of an open conversation on that.
Thank you, Nicole. You did great with the pressure, by the way.
Oh, thanks.
All right, Matt Oliver from Clear University. Katz says that the image of manhood that is shown in popular and political culture is crucial to think about and discuss if we want to develop a truly transformative approach to gender violence prevention. How do you think this can be applied in everyday thinking, discussions, and educational formats or trainings?
So let me start by saying my kids are all around, and sometimes they don't pay any attention to like this. So if I'm like talking, I apologize. And then two, sometimes my computer will just mute out And so if it does that, just kind of give me one of these and I'll know, okay? So I think we have to create, and this is kind of echoing some of what April said and some of the others, but April, what you said resonated with me. I think we have to create safe and challenging spaces for men to be able to take honest looks at what manhood has become and help them imagine what manhood can and should be. I think MVP does a great job of this. It was just in my little, I guess, taste of MVP through this documentary. I think Michigan Men at the University of Michigan is doing a good job of this, creating safe, challenging spaces and having honest conversations to go, what is going on here? And I think the response has been really positive. I believe these spaces need to work towards helping men discover what and who exactly have shaped their perception of manhood, their attitudes, their beliefs, their behaviors towards their self and towards others. And once the why is discovered about why they're doing what they're doing, I think that knowledge may create or establish a platform to begin identifying tools that they can begin to kind of work with. But I think doing that internal work is really, really critical and really, really hard to be able to receive tools to then begin practicing something, something different. I think we have to begin to slow our lives down enough to do these things. So April, you said, creating and having time and space. I think that's 100% accurate. We have to provide time and space and do a lot of serious, inviting to people, to coaches, to teams, to classes, because their lives are so full and their lives are so fast. To put trainings like this in place that have the value that athletics does is, I think, necessary. And so to have the buy-in from the top down of leadership to say, yes, you're going to play this and you're going to be in trainings like this. I think it's those things like that will begin to kind of redefine what manhood is. It'll become less about imposing someone's will on someone else and more about moral courage and humility, ethical courage, vulnerability, and kind of showing vulnerability in a strong way, instead of a way that is so commonly accepted as weakness. But empathy, awareness, and the ability to tell the truth, to remind people that there are in fact individuals that still speak truth, because I think our youth today. I think a lot of our youth today have begun believing that truth doesn't exist, and it's almost like when you tell the truth, you get a look as though you're speaking a different language, and it's that kind of shocking. But I think we need to provide spaces to remind not just young people, but people in general that people still do speak truth. People still do practice vulnerability. People still have courage. And so I think a big part of this is doing the hard work of looking within, looking at who has shaped you and what has shaped you. And that takes time, and that's really painful. But if you have the right facilitators in those contexts, I think that's huge. I think you can have really willing people in those contexts, but they might be the wrong person to be in those contexts, but they're willing. I think having the right person to facilitate those conversations is critical because of how sensitive they are. And then, once you have that, then you can begin kind of offering tools to people to begin to practice different habits that will sustain life instead of tear life down, that will build life instead of, reap more and more violence.
That was beautifully said. Thank you. I agree. I think that it's having the hard conversations that, yes, they are difficult, but they also set us free. So thank you for that. I appreciate that. For Pam Moss, General David Morrison stated, "The standard you walk past is the standard you accept." Can you discuss how our Livingston County Prosecutor's Office is challenging the acceptance of rape culture and not accepting this behavior as a standard?
Absolutely. So in the prosecutor's office, we are constantly challenging the standards because many of the myths of rape culture come into play in how cases get investigated. It comes into play into giving victims and survivors the opportunity to even come forward and report what's happened to them. And those myths and some of the things in rape culture come into play when dealing with the court system. And so we constantly are having to recognize when those myths are coming into play and try to change people's perceptions of how we're addressing sexual assault in the criminal justice system. So things that we are doing is we are challenging the way that not only law enforcement, but prosecutors, everyone involved in the criminal justice system are responding when sexual assaults are reported. We are trying to learn to use a much more trauma-informed response to victims when they're coming forward. And the other thing that's very important that we need to do is make sure that we keep our focus on offender behavior. So I want to talk about those two things. You know, one of the things that we have to do is we have to constantly challenge judgments that people have when someone makes an outcry of sexual assault. Sometimes it's the person that they've made their disclosure to, and sometimes it's us in the criminal justice system, both law enforcement, sometimes prosecutors. So we have to make sure that we don't have those negative judgments about victims when they first are reporting what's happened to them. We have to use that trauma-informed response. We need to understand that victims and survivors are sometimes engaging in behaviors that are counterintuitive. And, you know, we might think that, you know, them being scattered or something means that they're not being credible, when really it's just a fact of brain science. And the, you know, the flood of the hormones and the trauma that they experience, which is making what they're telling us, you know, if it were someone that in a normal conversation, we might think, oh, that doesn't make sense. But when we look at it from a trauma perspective, we know that it does. So we have to do that. And what we also have to do, like I said, is we have to increase investigative focus on perpetrators' behavior. And we have to think about this. What crime, other than sexual assault, do we focus on what the victim did, or how they were acting, or whether they were intoxicated? You know, we don't do that. I mean, if we had somebody who was intoxicated, went up to an ATM machine, you know, took money out and got robbed, we're usually not going to focus on those facts of that maybe they made a mistake of going to an ATM machine late at night, or maybe they made a mistake of going to an ATM machine when they were drunk. We don't. We look at the robber. But in sexual assault, we tend to focus on victim behavior. What did the victim do? And that's where we have to continually change our perspective and focus on offender behavior just like we do in any other crime. We have to understand how perpetrators are choosing vulnerable victims, how they're using alcohol and drugs to make a victim vulnerable. We have to know that they are choosing victims who are trafficked or homeless, who may have mental health issues, cognitive disabilities, or maybe victims that live in marginal, you know, are marginalized by society. So we have to look at what behaviors perpetrators are doing to pick on those victims, not those vulnerabilities that those victims have. And so we have to change. I think prosecutors are constantly working to make sure that we are focusing on looking at trauma-informed response and keeping the focus on the offenders. We really have to continue to work to shift the paradigm from looking, to looking at offenders' behavior. And we have to do that with our law enforcement, with the prosecutor's office, with our judges, and ultimately with the juries and the people in our community who are coming to sit in judgment on those cases. And so we have to talk to our community. So all the things that everyone does in the community is eventually going to have that trickle down effect. So when a case that's at the top of the pyramid comes into the justice system, that we can focus on what is right, which is perpetrator behavior, and look at it from that perspective. We also need to make sure that, we're giving our victims a voice. We need to make sure that we listen to their voices, that we listen to what they're telling us, and we have to push against things like system delay and people that use some of those rape myths to try to discount their experiences that they've had. So we work on those things every day in the prosecutor's office. And the other thing is we're very happy because we get to partner with LACASA, and we get to partner with schools and Cleary University and MAT and, in different committees and different work that we're doing to make sure that these system changes are coming. So when cases come into the criminal justice system, that we have a good response for victims and survivors of sexual assault. So we have to continue. We have to be open-minded about cases, encourage good investigations, and educate everyone about these myths and challenge those myths and make sure that we're encouraging people to listen to the voices of the victims in our community. And when we do that, we will make things better. And it's something that we do every day.
Thank you, Pam. Okay, my last question is for both DeAndre Lipscomb and Nicole Mason. Can each of you talk about your organization's involvement with LACASA? Why is supporting LACASA and other nonprofit organizations important to you? And how can you as a community member and business partner not only step in as a bystander, but become a change maker? I'd like to ask DeAndre Lipscomb from Lake Trust Credit Union to go first, and then Nicole Mason from ChemTrend next.
Well, thank you. Well, first of all, I would like to say that it's been an honor to be part of the panel today and to be able to just hear the conversation. This is such an important conversation for our community. At Lake Trust, our mission is really surrounded around overall community well-being. And so when we have discussions such as this, while we're a financial institution, we realize that as aspects of the community and with this type of assault occurring in criminal activity, that it impacts everyone, it impacts all facets of the community. So when you ask the question about why we partner with LACASA, is because of the important work that LACASA does in the community to protect victims, it's around education, it's all of the important work that you all do in the school systems to be able to help keep people safe, and to be able to bring topics such as this to the community in a forum such as this, and to be able to connect other community partners to be able to have the most impact. So we've have had a partnership with LACASA for many years. We're a mission partner. We believe that the mission of LACASA coincides very well with what Lake Trust is about, which is to be an engine of member and community well-being. And so that's why we're a partner. In terms of looking at our work in the community and why it's important, even as organizations, to take a stance and not just to be silent on topics such as this. Once again, I think we all have a voice, and it's about a collective voice in order to be able to make change happen. And I think organizations have a corporate social responsibility to step up and make sure that they're playing their role so that we can have the safest community possible, and to make sure that the overall community, once again, is well. And I use that word a lot, well, because once again, we have many facets that equate to wellness, whether it's financial wellness, whether or not it's health, whether or not it's mental wellness, whether or not it's safety, all of those things, every resident deserve and have a right to feel well. And so that's why we partner with LACASA, and we'll continue to partner with LACASA to help you all achieve your mission and do all the great work you do in the community.
Thank you, DeAndre. We appreciate that. And Nicole Mason from ChemTrend.
Yeah, so ChemTrend is a chemical company based in Howell. Our global headquarters is in Howell. We've been there for about 60 years. So the community is really important to us. And our partnership with LACASA is something that we're so proud of. We've been a mission partner for many years. We bring volunteers to all different types of events for LACASA. We support fundraising too. And we have a program called E-Squared that's focused on education and environment. And through this grant, we've been able to do so much in the community around education of violence prevention. And we've had a part in the MVP, the Mentors in Violence Prevention program, too. That's been a great success at Pinckney Schools. So there's so many different ways that we've been involved with LACASA. And it's important to us because it's a real problem in the community when you're talking about violence and violence prevention. LACASA does amazing things and they do great work, but they can't do it without all of us in the community. And with ChemTrend, we have 250 employees that live and work in the community. And so that's such a great support system for the work that LACASA does. When thinking about how I can be a change maker as a business person and part of the community, I really think about the conversation and keeping the conversation alive. It's really amazing. People don't realize that we have a problem with violence in Livingston County. We think we're sheltered from it. We're immune to it in some way. And it's so eye-opening for, especially when our employees get involved in some of these volunteer projects. We had a group of people that came to LACASA to help tear carpet out of some of the rooms to make them pet friendly. And inevitably, we start talking about LACASA's mission and talking about the shelter. Nobody realizes that shelter is back there behind the offices in LACASA. And the natural assumption is that people come from other counties to be in this shelter, right? Because we don't have a violence problem in Livingston County. And through those conversations, people really become aware of this is happening right here in our community. There is violence, it is a problem, and there's something we can do about it. If you don't know it's a problem, you can't be part of the solution. So seeing those connections happen through volunteer activities and through other outreach activities that we do with LACASA, each and every one of those connections it's just so cool to see that light bulb go off in people and say, there is a problem, I can be part of the solution, and when can I come back and what can I do next? So that's really the most rewarding part, I think, of our relationship is how LACASA and the mission that LACASA has in supporting survivors and victims, but also through the education and prevention, how it impacts each and every person that's involved with LACASA.
Thank you, Nicole. I am now going to turn it over to Nicole Matthews-Creech, who will cover our audience questions and present our panelists with some awards.
Awesome. And due to time, it is 5:17. So we had two questions in the Q&A. So Nicole Denson and myself have actually typed in some responses to those, but we will also send those out to everyone. So don't worry about going to look at it right now. We'll make sure that that gets sent out to all of our participants along with your event survey that you'll be receiving in the next couple of days. We want your feedback. So, but before we get into all of that, I want to take this last little bit of time that we have to acknowledge some folks that are important. So, so thank you to our panelists for providing such an incredible insight into this complex situation and these complex questions. I hope that all of our attendees enjoyed it as much as I did. I was a part of the panel question, development, but not the answers. So y'all didn't disappoint. Those are great answers, and I so appreciate that. We want to take some time to acknowledge some of our community's strongest advocates for change when it comes to victims of crime. So each of the following individuals will receive, will be presented with an award for their efforts. And some of them might be a little surprised and some of them might already know, but so this award will be, I have the Prosecutor's Award here, but each one of our participants and organizations will receive an award for their commitment to victims and survivors and your work with LACASA. We so appreciate all of you and all of your efforts. So I just wanted to take a couple of minutes to really talk a little bit about each one of you. Some of them we've already heard a little bit about, but it's really important to hear about all of the great work that's being done. So our first award goes to Bill Valancourt and Pam Moss on behalf of the Livingston County Prosecutor's Office. Bill Valancourt is the Livingston County Prosecutor. He's prosecuted numerous sexual assault and domestic violence cases over the course of his 27-year career as a prosecutor. His office chairs the child abuse response or CARE effort that occurs with LACASA and participates on the Sexual Violence Task Force or Sexual Assault Response Team and our Domestic Violence Response Team. Bill also serves as a member of LACASA's Board of Directors and has since his tenure as the Livingston County Chief Prosecutor. Pam Moss is currently the Chief Assistant Prosecuting Attorney for Livingston County, where she served since '97. As a prosecutor, she focuses on handling child sexual abuse, serious physical abuse, and criminal sexual assault cases, and is a frequent lecturer on these issues. So we're really lucky to have her in this area. She is a member of our Livingston County Multidisciplinary Team on Child Abuse and Neglect and Livingston County Sexual Assault Response Team. She's assisted in the CARE projects, as we're doing the interviews, as well as the development and changes that need to be made within that program. And the CARE project is what coordinates the forensic interviewing of an investigation for child abuse cases and sexual assault cases in Livingston County. So thank you to Bill and to Pam and the entire Livingston County Prosecuting Attorney's Office. We very much appreciate our relationship with you and your support of survivors. Next, I'd like to recognize Officer Christy Bell. Officer Bell is with the Brighton City Police Department and is on her 5th year as a fully sworn police officer for the city of Brighton. She actually started her law enforcement career as a reserve police officer for Brighton. She's currently a member with the department's Investigative Resource Unit, Field Training Officer Program. She's an instructor for TASER and is a hostage negotiator. That just makes me tired thinking about all of those things and how much training she's had to go through. So that's a lot, but really, and more close to home, Officer Bell also serves as the school resource officer for Brighton Schools and is a committed member of our community sexual assault response team and LACASA's Title IX multidisciplinary team. The multidisciplinary team, which also includes some other members that are on this call, works with our criminal justice system and our schools to enhance our response to sexual assault cases where parallel investigations are occurring within the criminal justice system and our schools, and to coordinate those efforts on behalf of victims and survivors. So Christy, thank you so much for your support, and thank you to the Brighton Police Department for loaning you to us during all of these meetings. Our third award goes to April Woods on behalf of Pinckney Community High School. Like all of our school districts, Pinckney welcomes LACASA's prevention education team into their schools, into their health classes each year to provide critical information about dating violence and sexual assault to the incredible youth in our community, and engage with their student body with our annual awareness campaigns that we conduct annually in March. In coordination with the staff at Pinckney High School, LACASA also facilitates peer support groups at Pinckney and an annual seminar targeting graduating seniors with information about their rights and responsibilities as they head to college, trade school, or into the workforce. What makes Pinckney different is their commitment to LACASA and the newly launched MVP program. You heard Katz mention briefly, right, the MVP program, which aims to educate our youth in conversations about their role in bystander intervention and really becoming leaders in those conversations. So we've been able to teach the student leaders to engage their peers in these conversations about gender-based violence and motivates them to be the change they wish to see in the world. And that's my favorite quote by Gandhi. So thank you to April and Pinckney Community High School. Next up is Matt Oliver. So Matt is the acting Associate Dean of Students at Cleary University. He's a native to Davis, Michigan, where he spent the first 19 years of his life. He then headed south to Nashville, Tennessee, where he completed his undergraduate and graduate work at Lipscomb University. I don't know if that's any relation, DeAndre, but you got to claim it maybe. He received his Bachelor of Arts in Theology and his Master of Arts in Divinity. Matt has had the pleasure of living in a wide variety of places across the country, including Michigan, Tennessee, Colorado, and Washington. Matt holds experience in working with camps, churches, prisons, and higher educational institutions. So he's got a lot of knowledge that comes from a lot of different areas. Matt is very humble, and thus he doesn't broadcast all that he does, because that was the bio that he gave me, and it didn't really talk about all of the amazing work that he does. So I get to toot his horn for him. And so I need to add that here. So Matt, along with his colleague Lorraine Bain at Cleary, is also a very committed member of our Title IX multidisciplinary team, and is a critical member of our Navigating Healthy Relationships education team, which works to connect with adults with disabilities about relationships, sex, and sexuality. And we're launching the first series of classes in just a few short weeks. So we're all really, really excited and so grateful to have Matt on our team. So thank you, Matt, for your willingness to jump in so many areas, and to Cleary for, again, letting us borrow you for so many of those things. Next, we have Nicole Mason, who is the Human Resources Director, North America for ChemTrend. LACASA's partnership, as you heard from Nicole, began before Nicole was in her position at ChemTrend, but she's been behind LACASA's efforts since day one of her joining the staff team there. Nicole serves also on the board of directors for LACASA and chairs our Human Resources Committee. She also serves as the connection to ChemTrend's parent company, Freudenberg, with their E2 initiative, who is committed to funding LACASA's prevention education program since 2015. Nicole and many of her colleagues have served LACASA as volunteers, assisting in almost every program where volunteers are utilized. And Nicole, along with a few others, have been trained as community leaders in the MVP program. ChemTrend itself is also one of LACASA's mission partners. So thank you, Nicole, and to ChemTrend for your incredibly consistent support. We literally could not do this without you. It's really hard to find prevention funding. We're with state organizations all across the state, the nation, and so many of them say, you actually have funding for prevention? And we get to say, yes, we do, which is amazing. So thank you. Allow me to reintroduce DeAndre Lipscomb, representing the community development for Lake Trust Foundation of Lake Trust Credit Union. And like ChemTrend, Lake Trust supports LACASA as a mission partner and is highly committed to volunteerism. Lake Trust not only provides volunteers to fill vacant roles when asked, but as a company, Lake Trust also hosts several community days, providing countless hours to LACASA and other nonprofit organizations across the state. Lake Trust not only allows, but encourages their employees to give back to their community by offering them annual paid time to volunteer at local agencies. With a nonprofit budget, LACASA could not do all that we do without the amazing support of awesome companies like Lake Trust. So again, DeAndre, thank you to you, to Lake Trust, and to the Lake Trust Foundation for all of your support. And last, but certainly not least, we want to acknowledge and honor Nicole Denson, our featured speaker of today's event. Nicole's bio was shared with you prior to the film, so I won't repeat it. However, I would like to add that upon initially reaching out to Nicole about her involvement in the event, there was absolutely no hesitation on her part to join us in this effort. She truly is an advocate for victims and an advocate for change. I'm so grateful that she set aside time in her schedule and to share her strength and her experiences with us today. And as she mentioned earlier, there was, and I'm so glad it was felt by you as well, the connection that was on the phone. I meant it to be, I don't know, a 20-minute phone call, and I think we were on the call for well over an hour, just talking about all of the things that we had in common and all of the wishes that we are dreaming for together. And so just so appreciate you being here, your efforts. Can't imagine having this event without you and bringing in those pieces that are so needed in this conversation on gender violence. So thank you, Nicole. And again, thank you to all of you, really, absolutely incredible. And I'm gonna shut up because my time is up, and I'm gonna turn it back over to Cassie to close us out for today.
Thank you, Nicole. Before closing, I would like us all to take a moment of silence to recognize those who were killed by violent perpetrators. During this time, I invite our panel members to now turn off their video for 1 minute. Thank you. Thank you all for taking the moment to do that. You may now turn on your screens again. On behalf of LACASA, I want to thank all of our panelists for being here today. Thank you for taking time to be a part of this event, to share your experiences and expertise, but also thank you so much for what you do in your everyday life to help others and to make the world truly a better place. It was definitely an honor to have you all here today, and we appreciate you working with us. To our audience, I also want to take time to thank each and every one of you for joining us here tonight. I know right now the world seems like a scary place. The news is hard to watch, and there always seems to be something else. With many issues of crime and injustice calling for our attention, it may seem like overload at times. But allow me to instill a little bit of hope in all of you. This is a different way to hold a film event, but it speaks volumes that our community has come together tonight. You showed up, you care, we support each other. It is people like you that make a positive difference and create transformative change. As we saw throughout the film and discussed throughout the panel, we have found that there are easy ways to step in and work towards changing our culture for the better. So I ask you, do not stay silent. Stay engaged. Keep listening, learning, looking for ways to get involved, and have these hard conversations. Keep showing up. And please don't ever stop speaking out on injustice. Thank you all again for being here tonight. We look forward to seeing you in person, hopefully very soon. Have a great night.
Thank you.